Okay, so just a very quick and warm welcome to you all. Yeah, it's really great that Mona is going to present from her current research at the Childhood and Society Special Interest Group seminar series. As I'll just give a brief introduction to the series. It's something that we host here at Middlesex University, and it's a space and an opportunity for um, education department scholars and researchers to present their work at whatever stage it may be, from a kernel of an idea to a fully fledged and funded gigantic research project to little smaller, more modest projects. But it's intended to be an open, inclusive space for everybody and an opportunity for us to share our works in progress. So, as I say, I'm absolutely thrilled that Mona has agreed to present on one of her current projects. I'm not going to say too much about the project or too much about Mona. I'll leave her to say that herself. But what the structure of the session, Mona will speak for around 40 minutes, and we'll have enough time at the end for question answer discussion. If burning questions arise to you as Mona's speaking, then pop them in chat and I'll collate them at the end. And yeah, if you could just ensure that you're on mute so we have no sound interference, that would be wonderful. And let's get started. Over to you, Mona.
Thank you so much, Jane. Right, I'll start sharing my screen. Here we are. And with your permission, Jane, I'm going to change the proportion of me talking so that we have more time and more space for dialogue and questions and thinking together, especially because we've got really some amazing people in the room. And Dilys in particular, I'm going to keep on coming to you for your input around baby rooms and baby room leadership, because this is your area of expertise. So I'm going to be talking today about a project, Baby Rooms Inspiring Leaders, and then within that some research I've been doing around the nature of baby room leadership. What does it mean to be a baby room leader in early childhood education and care? And it's a project that's quite a small project funded by the British Education, Leadership, Management and Administration Society, otherwise known as BELMAS. But it has really kind of captured my heart as a project, because there just isn't enough out there about how we think about the baby room leader, who is often the most amazing person there, not just in the nursery, but generally in the world. So it's really exciting to speak about this today. So let me just jump straight in. How does the research landscape look when we're thinking about baby room leadership? Well, we know from international research around leadership in early childhood education and care that it really matters, that leadership matters for children's outcomes. So this kind of big meta-synthesis conducted by Anne Douglas, published in 2019 by the OECD, demonstrates these kind of the impact that having good leadership within an early years setting makes for the children in that setting. However, and I've spoken about this before in seminars for the Children and Society series, leadership models in early childhood education and care are complicated. We don't have enough in terms of modeling leadership that is specific to the complexities of the sector. So when I'm talking about the complexities of the sector, I'm talking about the kind of mixed economy of provision, the fragmentation that exists within the sector, but also, and here I bring in the work of Professor Julie Nicholson, who's particularly kind of influential in shouting this message loud and clear, that there is a social justice imperative to early childhood education and care, regardless of the mixed economy, regardless of a huge proportion of its provision being private. We do it because we care, because we want to make the world a better place. And often the way that we model leadership in early childhood education and care doesn't put that social justice imperative at the very center of how we think about leadership. So we know that leadership matters, but we don't always have the best models or the most specific models for what it is in the context of early childhood. Okay, and then even within that, we know further that there is this lack of research that's specifically looking at baby rooms, looking at practice with 0 to 2-year-olds. So we don't have enough about leadership in early years. And then within that, we have even less to do with leadership when we're looking at people who lead practice with 0 to 2-year-olds. And just a tiny kind of note here on the terminology that I'm using. So I'll talk about babies, and I mean here 0 to 2-year-olds. So a lot of the literature talks about infants, the infant practicum. I choose not to use infant just because, you know, etymologically it means unable to speak, which I think is quite a deficit way of thinking about 0 to 2-year-olds. So I prefer babies. So when we're talking about the baby room, this kind of practice with 0 to 2-year-olds, we don't really know much about how leadership looks and feels. We know it on the ground, but we haven't really modeled it or thought about it in a kind of conceptual way. So this is where this research comes in. So the research questions underpinning this kind of bit of the project are: how do baby room leaders conceptualize their leadership? So this is very much about for baby room leaders by baby room leaders. What do they think is important in their leadership? And then how does that compare with the leadership that we see in other parts of the early years setting? So is there a case for really seeing baby room leaders as their own kind of type of leadership? Or is it just more of the same? Is it like any other part of the early years puzzle? You know, is it the same as leading the preschool room or leading the toddler room or leading the setting overall? Is there anything special here? So how to kind of answer those questions, engage with those questions, overall is taking this approach of a dialogical conceptualization of leadership. And this is something that I've written about and published very recently on with Juno Sullivan, the CEO of London Early Years Foundation, where we've looked together at how do professionals themselves think about their leadership and talk about their leadership. So rather than coming up with a model of leadership that gets kind of put on the top of them and imposed from above, is trying to work through a process of democratic collaborative reflection with people on the ground to work out how they see and feel and experience and conceptualize their leadership. So in this case, taking that kind of way of working and applying it to work with baby room leaders. So in particular, the findings that I'm presenting today are from a workshop conversation with 17 participants, and I include myself in that because it really was a conversation. And this was part of a wider workshopping process that is the Baby Rooms Inspiring Leaders project. I'm not going to tell you all the details of that bigger project, but essentially we're trying to create an open access leadership course for new baby room leaders, but it is created by baby room leaders. So this is going to be hopefully launched in September of this year. It's going to be free to access. And all of the resources and the sessions will be led by people who are currently baby room leaders. So as part of that, we've come together many times now in this workshopping process. But obviously in designing this open access course, we've had to have lots of in-depth conversations about the nature of baby room leadership. What would go in a baby room leadership course depends on what it means to be a baby room leader. So it's those discussions that I'm drawing on here to try and elucidate this idea of the baby room leader. Workshops were audio recorded, and then I've kind of done a rough thematic analysis in time, really just for this presentation. Okay, so in terms of the kind of analytical frameworks, it's not hugely complicated or sophisticated, but I really wanted to come to you today with some findings, with some things that we could discuss. So there were 4 things coming from the discussions that are really interesting to focus on. And I'm going to focus today with you just on 3 of the 4. 3 things that baby room leaders do a lot of. and therefore feature heavily in their conceptualization of what it means to be a baby room leader. The fourth theme, the one in red, journeys to baby room leadership, is a huge part of the conversation. And it's fascinating. How did you get to be a baby room leader? What brought you to the baby room? Where is the love for babies and working in the baby room? Where has that emerged from? Who supported it? How did it develop? It's its own kind of world. And I hope it's a discussion I can have at a later point. But for the sake of keeping this quite contained, I've put that to one side for today. So it's really these three things that baby room leaders do a lot of, and therefore constitute the kind of main aspects of baby room leadership that I want to put on the table today and start a conversation around. So firstly, and I'll go into detail with each of these, but let me just recap them now. Baby room leaders advocate for practice with 0 to 2-year-olds. Baby room leaders coach and mentor staff, and then in brackets, who don't always want to be there. And that's a really important kind of piece to factor into the equation. And baby room leaders have to juggle the needs of babies, staff, and parents and carers. And this in turn requires intensive self-leadership. I'm calling it self-leadership. You might want to think about it as kind of self-awareness, self-regulation, coping strategies, and so on. So let's dig a bit deeper. So first, the kind of advocacy element. And there is, and I don't want to not acknowledge it, there is a wealth of literature out there that has talked about leadership in early childhood education in terms of advocacy. So the need for us to be advocating all the time for the importance of the early years, for the need for huge levels of investment in the early years workforce. That is an element that runs right through the literature in early childhood education. So this isn't new, but what's new here is that baby room leaders often feel that even within the nursery context, they have to advocate for the importance of the baby room. So just kind of reading out a couple of quotes here. Those that work in baby rooms really do need to understand how babies develop, how their minds work, and the impact that we have on them. Now, building on that quote, the baby room leaders that I spoke to had invested their own time and their own money in doing courses that helped them to get a grip on what they saw as the magic of 0 to 2. Often finding that their own kind of professional development, there just wasn't the tailored professional development for them to develop the understanding that they wanted to bring to those earliest years of life. And so they were often so passionate and committed that they were driving that forward for themselves, so that with other practitioners in the setting, but also with parents, they could really, in an informed way, explain what is happening in that age range of 0 to 2 and why it is so essential and why it's so important and why there needs to be more investment in that time period. So as the second quote suggests, I think a lot of the investment of time and effort goes into the preschool room. I do think that baby rooms very often get overlooked with the thinking that they're just babies. And that seems to be quite a common perspective. So we have this kind of advocacy push in early years more generally, and then baby room leaders feel like they have to layer on top of that advocacy for what's happening with the very youngest children in the setting. The next kind of element is to do with the support of other staff. So a huge, as you would expect, a huge element of the role for baby room leaders was supporting the other staff in the baby room. And this was through coaching, through mentoring. But something that comes out from this, which is specific to the baby room or more intensive in the baby room, was a sense that often in the baby room, there's this kind of turnover of staff who maybe just feel that the baby room, following on from the previous slide, just isn't the place to be. It's either not for them, or it doesn't carry the kind of status or the stimulation that they are looking for as a practitioner, or that they've been taught to look for through our kind of training routes and qualifications and wider society. So baby room leaders saying things like, it's such a huge disappointment having, out of pretty much the whole room, just one person in the baby room that actually wants to be there. The others were just literally passing their day, clocking in and clocking out. And then another says, I think as a room leader, it's really hard and there's a big struggle to get staff on board with you on that. You don't want to hurt people or make people feel bad about themselves, but at the same time, you are there for the children. That's your main and first priority. So this is where baby room leaders are speaking about the need to really interrogate or challenge the practice of other practitioners who are in the baby room, but being in this extremely difficult position of feeling the need to do that because the baby's needs are the priority, but also this tension of, you know, they have people in the baby room working with them who don't necessarily want to be there and won't therefore necessarily respond very, very well to feedback. So they're in a really difficult situation. And, you know, again, that's something that's across the board in early years settings, that actually what we're finding here is that maybe it's even more intense in the baby room because of this hierarchy that exists within the early years environment. And then finally, this is around the self-leadership required when actually you are meeting the needs of so many other people. And this is the point at which I looked at Dillis's research around the kind of emotional labor, the interactions that happen in the baby room, the intensity of those. So trying to make sure you're meeting the needs of their staff, the babies and the parents. That's the juggling act that you need to play across the day. We spoke a lot about the attachment and babies being really attached to certain staff and how they balance that out. And, you know, not wanting to step on parents' toes and not wanting it to be uncomfortable and things like that. So not just kind of the needs of staff who don't necessarily want to be there and babies who, of course, have needs, but also parents and navigating and negotiating that relationship with the parents, which is particularly intense in the baby room because the baby room is most likely the first point of contact for the parent with that nursery. So perhaps by the toddler room, perhaps by the preschool room, that relationship to some extent has already been negotiated. But in the baby room, it's brand new, it's raw. Potentially, right? So imagine a mother or a father leaving a baby at the first time at the age of 8 months old and the separation anxiety and so on. Navigating all of that and helping a team to navigate all of that is extremely demanding, emotionally and physically. So, and this second quote really picks up on that. You know, the needs of babies are really intense. The needs of parents of babies are really intense, especially when it's their first kind of experience of the nursery, which it is in the baby room. It almost always is the first experience that they're having of that setting. Then also the staff, often you might be passionate as a baby room leader, but the staff who you're leading aren't always there because they're passionate and because they've made that active choice. So they're in a kind of whirlpool really of emotions and needs of these three different parties that surround them. And as a baby room leader, the pressure is on to somehow kind of hold this together and hold it all in some kind of balance. That requires huge levels of emotional resilience. And so one of the questions in follow-up interviews that I've been asking with baby room leaders is just, how do you do it? How do you manage this whirlpool of needs and emotions that you sit in the middle of? How do you stop it from becoming a whirlpool that engulfs you? And of course, not, you know, missing the irony here that as a baby room leader, your pay your conditions, your status are all, there's no other word for it, they're shocking, right? So actually you're doing all of this, but the pay that you're taking home at the end of the day isn't even really enough to live on. And so you're being asked to do this self-leadership in order to lead others amidst all of these needs. And yet the recompense is severely lacking. So I said I wanted to finish my talking early so that we'd have more time for questions. So I think a few more minutes and we'll be ready to dialogue. But conclusions, baby room leaders, according to their own accounts, need to be advocates of practice with 0 to 2-year-olds in particular. They need to be expert coaches who can even coach and mentor people that don't always want to be there. And they also need to be able to self-lead, to negotiate, to manage the needs, the intensive needs of babies, parents, carers, and staff all at the same time. So I think probably my main conclusion is, wow, all of this needs to be done. And yet, while you've got all of these requirements heaped onto the shoulders of the baby room leader, you have this underinvestment really in them as professionals in the wider context of society, but then also in the context of just early years provision. So their requirements are intensified by the fact that baby room practice is generally undervalued and too often invisible, so just not really kind of thought about or brought to the fore. Practitioners in the baby room, perhaps because of that, have quite mixed feelings about being there, a sense often that if they don't love it in an instinctive way, that they don't really have any place there, which needs perhaps to be challenged. And parents who are leaving their child for the very first time, which again just intensifies this mix of emotions. So despite having this particularly demanding role, we also know from just scoping the professional development pathways that exist currently that baby room leaders are least likely to receive tailored professional development. So all of the baby room leaders spoke about being, if they did get to go on a course, often having to try and adapt what was on the course to make it work for them in the context of the baby room, and finding that a real struggle, and that they're just not really being anything specific to baby room leadership, despite the fact that the particular mix that they're dealing with of emotions and needs is specific. It's why we're doing this project, right? So we're hoping that the open course open access course that we develop as part of Baby Room's Inspiring Leaders, just does a little bit of that, starts to fill the gap just a little bit. But honestly, there is a huge need for so much more that specifically situates itself within the baby room, because from everything that the baby room leaders are saying, this is an ecosystem that works according to its own logic a lot of the time, and where a lot of those requirements, as I'm suggesting, are just even more intense than in other parts of the nursery. So I'm going to hand that over as kind of an opening for dialogue. And I hope it won't just be kind of questions for me, but rather a dialogue that we can have among ourselves, because I'm sure there's so much expertise and experience within the room, and it would be really good to draw on that. But I'll stop sharing now, Jane, and then we can open the floor.
Perfect. Okay, so does anyone want to kick the discussion off? There was a comment in from Caroline saying that there were similar themes in her own research. Do you want to pick up on that point, Caroline?
Hiya, yes. All right, just put this on. Hi, thanks so much, Mona. That was really interesting. It's nice to see you. I'm doing some research myself on the practitioners in the baby room, and kind of looking at the interactions that have been going on. And one of the key things that are coming out from my findings, very similar to yours, that it's the practitioners who are feeling that kind of conflict the whole time of what do we prioritize? Is it the emotions of the babies and those interactions, or is it the organizations and the functions that we need to kind of perform each day to make sure everything looks like it's going well? Interestingly, I didn't have baby room leaders involved in mine, and the comment that you made about that baby room leaders felt the practitioners didn't want to be there, coming through from mine, it was the practitioners felt the baby room leaders didn't want to be there. So it's really interesting kind of looking at actually the similarities that are there, but maybe the underlying tensions that are within maybe teams as well, and how that can affect the kind of the aura, I guess, of the environment.
Yeah, that's so interesting. There's so much to pick up on there. I mean, absolutely. I had this really self-selecting sample because they were baby room leaders who wanted to make a course for other baby room leaders. And so they're definitely all baby room leaders that do want to be there. But there is a tension, isn't there, between kind of the management of the nursery overall, who gets put into the position of leadership within the baby room? How is that negotiated and felt by the practitioners that might have been in that room for much longer? There is a really kind of complex setup there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it really is very complex. And I think, like you said, there just needs to be so much more work kind of focused on the baby room and kind of the emotions that just are kind of an undercurrent throughout everything that the practitioners are doing and that they feel for the babies as well. It's that relationship is sort of at the core of it, with everything else, like you said, whirling around. So yeah, really interesting work. So thank you for sharing it.
No, thank you.
Can I just jump in with a comment, observation, question? I was really struck by what you'd said, and I've noticed it myself in my own research about it's almost like an apathy or a frustration at being in the baby room, that there's not much going on and just clock watching, and and I just wonder where that comes from, because if you properly attune to babies, they're absolutely fascinating. The way in which they explore the world and make sense of the environment in which they're in, and the relationships that they're building with spaces and people and things and routines and all of that stuff. I just wonder, where does that begin? Because presumably if people could better recognize the wonder of babies, then it would be a fascinating thing to be doing every minute of every day. So how does that get missed along the way, I suppose?
I think that's such an interesting thing to look at. And I don't have an answer. I mean, I've been looking at it the other way. So there's a kind of contingent of people who work in the baby room who just go, I went around the nursery and then I came to the baby room and this was it. I knew that I was going to be in the baby room for as long as I could be in the baby room. And I've tried to tap into why that emotional response, or why that sense of, and it is often around wonder, the wonder of the babies, like it just something feels magical. But if you could take it and unpick what that thing is, you wonder, well, is it something that people could actually develop? So we're very much riding on a discourse of the moment of, I didn't realize I would naturally be drawn to babies, but I found myself in the baby rooms and it was just instinctive. It's just so natural. And I've asked that question of, does it have to be instinctive? Do you think somebody could learn to be a good practitioner in the baby room? And there's a lot of, honestly, quite a bit of skepticism around that it is just this thing that either switches on or it doesn't switch on. But it would be amazing to dig deeper into what is the thing that switches on, and can it really not switch on for everybody? Because it would be great if it could.
But I wonder if some of it has to do with, this kind of developmentalist logic that, that the baby, it's kind of moving towards a kind of point of greater accomplishment later on, and so we just have to get through the baby phase before, so they can be verbal and move and mobile and fine motor skills and blah, and kind of then neglecting what is amazing about being birth to two, that just gets overlooked as a kind of transitory phase until, oh right, okay, we've got a ton of stuff popping up. So Michelle, you said maybe it's to do with the misconception of the curriculum. Do you want to add to that?
Yeah, hi everyone. Yeah, just something that we've been doing a lot within our organisation at the moment is really trying to almost debunk the notion of curriculum. You know, I think anybody working in early childhood at the moment, you know, it's kind of the word that we're all hearing about, isn't it, constantly, particularly in relation to Ofsted inspections, etc., everything else, and you know, the changes with regards to the statutory framework. And yeah, I think particularly I started my early years journey in baby rooms, and so, you know, feel I was and still am that really passionate person who just wants to be there. And actually, I think, Jane, to your point, wants to celebrate babies in the here and now. And so there's two bits that we've been doing a lot on with the staff in our organisation, and it is the notion of curriculum and really kind of unpicking that and what does that mean, because I think, you know, in lots of early childhood settings, we see baby rooms where staff feel under pressure to do art and craft or to do painting or, you know, and actually to your point, I think it was Mona, you know, actually going back and just being with babies and interacting and doing all of that lovely serve and return and, you know, just the wonderful conversations and the fun and joy of being with babies. I think sometimes the pressure to plan an activity or, you know, to have something look like you're doing something. And I wonder if that's sometimes where some of that, you know, almost struggle comes from. And yeah, then the sort of the other piece of that goes back to, yeah, just that, again, that notion of curriculum, but next steps, which again, I think most people in early childhood are very familiar with that term. And so we're really trying to move away from that, because I think that does almost in people's minds think that it's not, the here and now isn't important, it's about what's coming next. So yeah, just two things that really resonated with me in terms of those conversations just now. Thanks.
Yeah, I love
That's
that.
fascinating. I wonder whether we should be kind of pitching working in the baby room as sort of a mindfulness retreat. Because it does seem particularly special, and it does seem a kind of mode that people either enter into or there is resistance to enter into it, and it is something to do with that time, that sense of time, and where are we going with this, and that need to kind of, you know, for the next bit, the next wow moment, it has to be around a wow moment rather than just this interaction right now is enough.
Yeah, and just as last thing I'll just share is, because the other big piece that we're doing is really focusing on environments, and sort of really trying to go back to, you know, what is it that a baby room environment should be like. And I think you mentioned, I wrote it down because it really stuck with me, that kind of ecosystem of a baby room being within the wider setting. And again, that's something we've just started to embark on across the organisation, is really to look at what do we want our baby rooms to look like, to feel like, and actually what we don't want them to do is almost be the step before, you know, the preschool or the toddler room or whatever kind of age group comes next. So yeah, really looking at how do we make baby rooms, you know, really support babies in terms of that whole attachment piece and the relationships and the connections, but actually make them feel like places that they're familiar with, which essentially is home, isn't it? So really trying again just to move away from that kind of almost school, institutional, you know, kind of yeah, operational view of what baby rooms should look like. So yeah,
Fascinating.
We've now got
exciting
comments.
times.
Thanks for that. We've now got comments backing up. So Hannah is actually typing from the staff room, so can't speak. She says she's studying for her BA in early childhood and early education and childcare, and find that little to no course content this term is curated with those working under threes in mind. Much similar with funding being received by the baby room. I feel that if we get it right in the first stage, relationships and funding, and create strong bonds with the babies and parents in this room, then we will have better bonds throughout the nursery journey. And then Dillis has chipped in and said, Peter Elfer's research is really key, exploring the challenges of managing the emotional atmosphere in the baby room that can lead to avoiding engaging with the babies because it's easier to manage routine tasks rather than difficult feelings. Dillis, do you want to add to that? I'll take that as a no.
Sorry, I'm here.
Oh, you are there.
Hello.
Yeah, I think sometimes it is quite overwhelming for practitioners in baby rooms, because often they're the ones who are least qualified. And as Mona was saying, that there's not that many opportunities for CPD for baby room practitioners. So it's really tough, especially if you know, the practitioners themselves don't think babies should be in the baby room, and parents are anxious, babies are fractious, that it's difficult to see all the wonderful things that babies do, because it is there's very primitive emotions going on around that can lead to sort of cutting off from that, because it's easier to cut off than it is to actually manage the contradictions that you might feel in yourself, or what's going on, and this feeling of isolation often from the rest of the nursery, that it's not that it is different, and it's a different kind of job role, and they often feel misunderstood in that. So I quite I've noticed, I suppose, myself quite a lot that sometimes it is actually more satisfying for practitioners to sort out routines than to actually enjoy what they're doing.
Can I just throw a sort of curveball in here? A while ago, I examined a PhD in Canada, and the student was a manager of a childcare centre, and what she wanted to do was to try to completely disrupt the idea of rooms and age segregation, and so she battled her way through the local authorities to absolutely remove age segregation in the nursery. And of course, there are all sorts of health and safety issues and equipment and and it meant reducing the numbers. And so, you know, but what became possible through that experience in terms of practitioners operating necessarily in a different way, and children interacting, interacting in a way that was more collaborative and respectful. And so these sort of divisions between, you know, staff members and children in that linear developmentalist model was completely upended, and just, you know, endless sort of wonderful surprises, but obviously it was super stressful. But it's possible. So, you know, I just wonder, we get so wedded to this is the way we've always done it, this is the way it has to be done, but I wonder if there's even the possibility of disrupting the whole, you know, kind of way in which that's the way business is always done.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't come across anything that extreme, but there are different levels of cross-fertilization definitely happening within nurseries. So there are the baby rooms that are kind of a separate part of the nursery, very clearly. And then there are the other baby rooms where there is much more flow in and out, both of staff, but also of the children in and out of the baby rooms. And so I think that's a really interesting thing to look at in relation to what we were talking about earlier of this mode of being, the way that you are with children, or that you might be with children who are very, very young. So there's some amazing research done by Shin, I can't remember the first name, but looking at people on their early years kind of training pathways, when they have the experience in the baby room, what does it bring to their practice when they're not in the baby room? And essentially the kind of experiences are always of quite a lot of challenge and struggle and resistance to begin with, to being in the baby room, and then pushing through that to find this new mode that carries through to other parts of the nursery. So I think that cross-fertilization bit is really, it's probably not the right term to use, but it's the only one I can think of for now. But it's a really interesting piece to look at.
Okay, we've got a couple of things here. One is what we can learn from Scottish nurseries in realising the ambition. A couple of people have mentioned that, realising the ambition and environments. And then, Caroline, do you want to to voice this yourself, or shall I phrase it?
I'm happy to come on, that's fine. Yeah, just to say, similar to the themes that you've been talking about, the fact that the practitioners I've worked with seem to feel that they didn't have permission to be with the babies, to interact with them for prolonged periods, because they felt they needed to be busy and to be doing all those functional tasks, that sort of moving around the room, trays, nappies, all of those kind of elements. So I just sort of found that that was quite interesting aspect, kind of, which again highlights the issues that baby room leaders are feeling, that actually the rooms need to function in a particular way, but equally the babies still need to be sort of central to everything that's going on. And I've been trying to develop a model, part of my PhD work, to enable practitioners to feel that they have got permission, and they can kind of embed that within their planning, if they need to do planning, if that's an organisational element that they need to follow, that they can go to sort of management, senior management, and say, actually, this has to be the absolute core of our pedagogy, is being with the babies, and everything else we can kind of manage within that, but we have to be interacting with them and getting to know those babies. Yeah.
That's amazing. And because that tension as well between doing something, what am I doing? That's something that you come across with people that are training so often as well, is that sense, but I feel really uncomfortable because I'm not doing anything at the moment and I need to do something. And so that's having that sense of permission, I think is bigger as well. It's not just the permission to not do the tasks sometimes and focus on the interactions, but even within the interaction, the permission you give to yourself to sit back
Yeah.
and see what happens, rather than feeling the need to kind of push the learning in any kind of really active way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Michelle was saying earlier that it's the curriculum that drives it, isn't it? So if we can actually give practitioners, particularly in that baby room and toddler rooms, the tools they need to say, you know what, yes, the planning and the art and craft activities, they are important, but within that is the interaction and that moments of being still with the babies, and sort of just exchanging those deep emotions that come with being with babies, that wonder of babies that you've both spoken about.
Can I just Charlotte Arculus, who's doing her PhD at Manchester Metropolitan University, is looking at her research is on birth to 2 toddlers, pre-verbal, and the role of improvisation. So, you know, the kind of resistance to the literacy agenda and the imposition of a curriculum, and celebrating what improvisation makes possible. So it's kind of taking what you were saying about taking a step back and sitting and letting to see what unfolds one step further. And I think there's some really interesting, you know, kind of insights from her. Kind of background is performing arts and music, but you know, this kind of, if we can just be bold enough, brave enough to just not feel like this busyness thing, I think is fascinating, because I think mothers are guilty of that, first time mothers. It's like, oh, if, you know, I've got to be busy all the time, and you fail to kind of really engage and attune to babies and what, you know, what's there, because you're so anxious to be doing something functional that's, as everybody has said, is easier than dealing with the emotions and the unpredictability that babies are. So I think there is, you know, we need a little quiet revolution, really.
Yeah. And I think it's worth recognizing as well that these kind of, inhibitions, limitations, they can come from people working in the baby room, but they are often also very much, you know, imposed. So that sense of, you know, I remember Gabby, who was the baby room leader at my firstborn's nursery. There is in fact a policy in place, which she later told me about, that, you know, she couldn't take a child onto her lap because a parent had complained that it made them uncomfortable to see the child on Gabby's lap or any practitioner's lap. And so the nursery, a private nursery, had introduced this policy of don't try not to have the babies on your lap. That kind of thing is so deeply disempowering for a practitioner in a baby room who is trying to develop these relationships and these strong, intensive attachments, that you can then imagine that one experience like that, even if it was in another nursery and now you're working somewhere else, really impacts hugely on your sense of what you can be autonomous in terms of, and that capacity to sit back and enjoy the interaction. Well, how do you actually sit back and enjoy an interaction if you know that there is a directive to not hold that baby on your lap if they want to be held on your lap? You know, that so there are lots of things that we can kind of do through a quiet revolution, but there is also a need to be really clear about the kinds of things that managers of nurseries, and then above those managers, the kind of pressures that they're working under, what that shouldn't be dictating in terms of baby room practice.
So Nikki, I saw you had a shock reaction. Do you want to add words to that emotion?
Oh, sorry, I'm on my iPad. I don't think the camera's working. Yeah, just I've heard that before in a similar, but actually from a practitioner talking about thinking that children, I mean, it was a really horrible expression. She used the expression of children being promiscuous, climbing on all over their carers and the practitioners. And I just thought, oh my God. And it's just like, that's another angle on it. And I just think you're completely right. How can you develop close relationships with babies without being physical with them? It's just something we really need to tackle. I mean, this whole presentation has raised so many issues about what we need to tackle in terms of care for babies and appreciating the huge importance of that developmental stage and what practitioners can do for that. But the emotional side of that is a massive part of it, as I know, you know, Mona and Dilys will, you know, strongly agree. It's really tough. So I think, yeah, I was just shocked really that they might not be able to climb on their laps. You know, we carry children all the time. That's what we do, isn't it? We carry babies and we hug babies, and that's how they learn about us and we learn about them. So yeah, that was it really. Need to tackle it. Thank you.
Thanks, Nikki. Yeah, and I don't want to, you know, Dilys, I went to a talk given by Dilys and Lynette a couple of years ago, which was all about this. So I don't want to kind of pretend that didn't exist. It was hugely influential on me and many other people, but it was around kind of the emotional labor of early years practitioners, but in relation as well to aspects of that kind of physical relationship and how that those physical expressions of love might be policed or shaped by wider forces, and what that does to the work. And not least, of course, like it's just not fair, is it, to be working with babies and to be robbed of the joy of a physical relationship with the baby when so much of any relationship is going to have that really strong physical element to it. So there's a lot that is just quite unfair, I think.
Just checking that. Oh, crikey. Okay, we are out of time. I guess we can squeeze one more comment or question in if anybody has a burning urge to say something at this point.
Jane, if I could just say, there's a huge level of expertise, experience in the room that I would love to continue to learn from. So if anybody wants to just drop me an email in order to connect and follow up any discussions, I would so welcome that. Always up for a chat about the baby room. So please do get in touch. I'll pop my email in the...
I've just done it for you.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, Jane.
Okay, that's been amazing. I mean, gosh, you know, really has opened a big fat can of worms that needs to be continued to grapple with. But thank you so much for sort of setting off those provocations, and yeah, let's hope the conversations continue. Thanks everyone for joining, and yeah, everybody's now thanking you and yeah, saying how wonderful it is. So brilliant. Thank you all and have a great day. The recording of this will be available on our website, so you can share it with anyone you know who may have wanted to see it and was unable to tune in. But thanks everyone, have a great day.
Thanks everybody, bye-bye.
Thank you.